So I want to talk about dumb strawberries. These guys right here. This is actually not a dumb strawberry. It's called a mock strawberry. And the reason it is called that is because it is not actually a strawberry. It is related to strawberries, but very distantly. This is a cinquefoil. Cinquefoils and strawberries are both in the rose family. So they are both roses. Fun fact, if you didn't know that, there are a ton of plants in the rose family. And it's also worth mentioning that both plants are edible. So if you do confuse one for the other, you're not going to be harmed by it, though you probably won't like this one as much. Why do I call it a dumb strawberry? Well, honestly, it has to do with that flavor, or lack thereof. It really doesn't have much flavor going for it. It's not unpleasant, I guess, maybe to some people, but it's definitely not a pleasant experience. To me, it just tastes kind of like maybe slightly metallic water. That's about all I got. I've heard some people say it has a hint of watermelon, a hint of cucumber. I didn't get that from my taste tests, but hey, each plant is different. You might find some that have subtle variation in their flavor. That said, to pair along with that flavor, the texture is also not super fine here. It's a little bit on the soft, mushy side, but kind of styrofoamy in a way, which I don't really recommend either. That said, again, fully edible, both plants are. This plant supposedly contains a lot of vitamin C, but I leave all of that to the experts. I leave any medicinal stuff up to the experts, because that's not the purpose of the channel. I just want to talk about things I find cool. So, what is this plant? Well, it is a non-native plant called Potentilla indica, which I probably pronounced wrong, also sometimes called Duchesnea indica. I think I pronounced that one a little bit better. And if you are curious as to, well, strawberries, they come in a lot of different species, but the wild one that I can find here, or at least the one that I grow in my backyard, is this one right here, Fragaria virginiana. There are a handful of other wild strawberry species where I live in Missouri as well, but this is probably going to be the most common, and I have only ever found one of this plant. So as soon as I found it, I took it home because I took literal years searching for one. I wanted to find it on my own, not with somebody's help, of course. And when I took it home, put it in the ground, it took off. It sprung up like a rocket. So it's a fantastic little plant. It's real happy where it is, thankfully. But these I have literally found everywhere. Everywhere that I have looked for wild strawberries, I have found these. How do you tell the difference then? Well, on first glance, you may see when we look right here that the fruits on the strawberries tend to be a little bit more long than they are wide. These tend to be a little bit rounder in all dimensions. Also worth noting, though, that the fruit on the wild strawberries tend to droop, so they hang downward typically. That is not the case for the mock strawberry, where the fruits aim up towards the sky, as should be noted. And it's also worth noting, too, that typically, though not always, when the fruit is taken off of the stem, if we go ahead and take this off here, you can see on the wild strawberry that the sepals, the little green bit, the crown is just what I'm going to call it, will usually disconnect with the fruit, whereas with the mock strawberry on this side, the sepals do not disconnect most of the time. You can get them to come off, but it's usually going to stick behind on the stem. And it's also worth noting, as it's pretty obvious here, that the seeds are sort of off of the surface here. They're protruding from the surface of this fruit, and they're very easy to rub off as well, which is probably beneficial to this plant specifically. Also just produces way more seeds in general than a strawberry of the same size. But we can see that the seeds on the wild strawberry are embedded in the surface. The surface actually kind of swells around it. Both of these are accessory fruits, which means that the part that you're eating isn't technically the fruit. What is the fruit, botanically speaking, is the little bit of like red coloration around the outside of the seed. It's a very goofy thing. I'm probably not explaining it as well as I could, but each individual seed is coated in a thin membrane, essentially, and that whole assembly is the fruit. That is true for both of these plants. I just always find that stuff super fascinating. That said, how else can you tell apart these plants when they're not fruiting? Well, for one thing, if I can pick this up off my desk, wild strawberries going to have white to maybe subtly pink flowers. When wild, you can get hybrids and different mixes of them, different varieties of them that have different colors of flowers, even like much darker burgundy reds. They smell amazing too. This one here has a very subtle smell to it. It's kind of sweet, kind of berry-like in its smell. This one is the mock strawberry, yellow. It should be obvious, as most, if not all, cinquefoils have yellow flowers, typically never white, but again, you could always have a plant with genetic issues that gives it white flowers. No idea. So usually, if not always, going to see yellow flowers on mock strawberries, never going to see yellow flowers on wild strawberries specifically. Not a huge mistake. They're both pretty. Both flowers are similar-ish in size, but it's also worth noting that this is a cluster of flowers, 6 flower buds here, with 2 of them being open. This is a single flower on a single stem. So that is obviously another difference. In terms of the scent here, it is ever so slightly doughy or yeasty, so it's not really sweet in its smell. Seems to attract ants more than anything else, whereas the wild strawberry tends to attract like bees and things like that. Also aphids. So that is something I have definitely seen with these plants, though. No real issues with aphids. Strawberries get lots of aphids, so just want to be aware of that. In terms of the leaves of the plants, I know that it's wilted because I've tried to record this video several times, but the leaves on the wild strawberry are much bigger. This is an entire leaf here, each of these being individual leaflets, and those leaflets are about 3 inches long on average. This is a roughly average size leaf. Also tend to be much taller, up to about a foot tall, if I'm being honest, and both will grow evergreen all year round. They will keep their leaves. The tallest of leaves on the strawberry plant will usually die off, but the ones that are real low to the ground will usually stay green through the winter. The mock strawberry, the same is true there as well. Also green all year round. Tallest leaves will usually die off, while the leaves on the ground will stay green. That said, these leaves are much smaller, half to 1/3 the size, and the leaflets individually are about 1 inch long at most. As you can see, leaves behind the crown here in this case, and that crown is much more showy as well, if you can't tell. It's quite big. So yeah, that's basically everything worth noting. In my climate, they like very similar growing conditions, but I'm only really testing with one wild strawberry plant, so I haven't tested it in like full shade or anything. These mock strawberries will tolerate full shade and full sun, and both plants spread via similar mechanisms, right? So both of them, obviously, by being eaten, seeds are spread that way. Because this plant, the seeds rub off super easily, these seeds could also get caught in like the fur of a passing animal, and they're slightly sticky where they come off as well, just because of the, like, I don't know, fluid or whatever is being exchanged from the plant to these. So they can also stick to the actual animal itself because they just don't weigh a whole lot, right? So they might fall off in that way too, so they can be spread via multiple means there. Obviously, with wild strawberries, because those seeds are embedded and much harder to remove, generally they're just not going to come off quite so easily. Texture-wise, on wild strawberries, if they're not cold, they're going to be a little bit mushy. They're not going to be as crisp as like a supermarket strawberry. Obviously, flavor-wise, it's going to vary wildly depending on the species, of course, and of course, just because these are wild plants at the end of the day. They haven't been cultivated to be for their flavor specifically. So you might get some that are really strongly musky, some that are very sweet, some that are very tart, right? And yeah, pretty cool. Lastly, they also spread via runners. So they will actually put out little like I don't even know what to call them. Just little feelers, if you will, that when they hit the ground will actually drop a new set of roots and then sprout from there. And you can clone both plants by literally just popping that runner out of the ground and cutting off the lead from the mother plant, essentially. Pop it into a new flower pot, and yeah, you have another one. That's basically it. So that's really just about everything there is to know about both plants. How would I use this in an application? Like a fruit salad, that's basically it. It doesn't have a lot of flavor on its own, so it doesn't contribute really anything to a salad. It might give you a pleasant texture if you like that texture to it. The seeds are obviously going to be a little bit crunchy, of course, but because it doesn't have a lot of flavor, it's obviously going to be covered up by other flavors really well, right? So in a salad with other things, well, yeah, I think it'd work just fine. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. This guy, non-native from Southeast Asia, technically an invasive species, but it doesn't do a lot of harm to the environment as far as I've been able to see. So it's not really like a species that like people are trying to eradicate necessarily. And honestly, I could see even some value in trying to cultivate versions of this with flavor because of how prolific this is. And I didn't even think to mention it, but the flowering period on both of these is significantly different. Obviously, you can buy ever-bearing strawberries from the store and from cultivated varieties, but typically wild strawberries have a pretty short window in flowering, maybe 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the year and the climate. These can honestly flower literally all year round. It really just depends on the climate. Where I live, zone 6B, I have even seen these throw up a flower or two in the winter, which is honestly kind of crazy, but yeah, they will do it. But typically through early spring all the way through to like late fall, and then they're gonna go ahead and disappear. So they're not as prolific as strawberries. They don't put out as many fruit at the same time, but they do put out a lot of fruit over a longer period of time. And it's worth noting that these just pop right off of the stems really easily as well. And if you want to see what that looks like, that's what it looks like. So liquidy kind of on the inside, but yeah, fairly dry otherwise. Hopefully that answers all your questions that you wanted to know about mock strawberries, I guess. That's it. All right, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe because it really helps the channel out. These are among the biggest mock strawberries that I've seen in terms of fruit. Not the biggest plants I've seen, but this fruit is pretty big, about the size of a penny, a US penny, diameter-wise, so roughly a ball in shape too. Pretty big. All things considered, I think that this was a good one. So if you enjoyed it, like I said, like, subscribe, and you can find Discord, Instagram, and Patreon if you want to help support what it is I do here on the channel. Then yeah, I won't stop you, and that can be found over down in the description. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and have you tried either mock strawberries or have you tried wild strawberries? And if so, what kind? And if you haven't tried either, what's your favorite, I don't know, store or variety of cultivated strawberry? Answer that, I guess. I don't know. Take care, guys.